Hello everybody and welcome to Nintendo 64 Magazine Time Capsule episode 4. Before we go into today's magazine, I just want to do a quick thank you to everybody that took part in the contest in the last video for all of your likes, all of your comments and the 2 video responses that I got. Now I did try to record the random prize draw selection off my screen, but unfortunately the video quality didn't come up good enough to be able to use. There's a lot of reflection from these iMac screens. So what I've done is I've put a list of the winners in the description below. Also, if you have won, please check your inboxes because I will need your addresses for where you would like them to be shipped to. This month's contest is currently running over on my Facebook page, so if you haven't already done so, go to the link in the description, hit my like on the new Facebook page that I have set up, and the contest details are all on there as well. So with all the competition news out of the way, let's get into the very next episode of N64 Magazine Time Capsule. This month's cover features a Mario Kart 64 theme with a full UK version review inside. Also inside will be a guide on how to survive Japanese arcades, news about Struggle Hard, Holy Magic Century and Sonic Wings Assault. Tim Weaver will be doing a masterclass on ISS 64, and the back cover has a PlayaLives 64 advert which is quite cheeky, and a small strip finishes off the content listings for this issue. Opening up and you'll immediately notice a very cool looking console and controllers to the left. This company were offering to chrome your N64 gear. Now after looking into this for you, I found out that they used to charge £60 for consoles and can confirm that the company is no longer around. I've never seen any of these chromed consoles for sale before, and I can't imagine too many people took them up on this offer. The letter from the editor in this issue talks about how much fun the magazine staff have had with Mario Kart 64, and they also apologise for the lack of reviews in this issue, but state they simply cannot review games if there aren't any coming out. He also adds a story about a seed he planted in the office that's now sprouting leaves. Reading this alone should let you know just how quiet this month had been for the N64 magazine staff. We've got the usual contents page here, so nothing too interesting, but there is a new addition to the N64 magazine team, and you can read about him in the Team 64 section to the right. Holy Magic Century is up next, which is Quest 64 if you're outside the PAL regions. The magazine has finally got to play the game now, and is amazed at how far the game has come since they played it last when it was under the name Crystal Stories. They comment on the attention to detail even for the non-playable characters, and say that they are adding this game to their eagerly awaited list. It's fair to say that looking back now this sounds funny, but when the magazine was released this game must have looked very promising. Future Look kicks off with a look at Sonic Wings Assault, and the N64 magazine team have a whole set of exclusive photos here to show. They also got some time to speak to Paradigm about the game and how the project came about. They also pressed the developer on their future N64 games and even asked if PlayaLives 2 was being worked on, as Paradigm had worked with Nintendo on the N64 launch title PlayaLives 64. We have a look at Struggle Hard, which is now at 40% completion. If you're wondering what Struggle Hard is, well, it went on to be called Fighter's Destiny, and the writers are very positive about the early look at this game and admire the points-based scoring system and found it to be refreshing compared to the usual standard fighting bars. To celebrate the launch of Mario Kart 64 here in the UK, Nintendo hosted a go-karting event and invited the bigwigs from the UK journalism scene. N64 magazine finished in 5th place from around 30 or so people who took part. Being the cheap bastards that they are, they also held a competition to win the t-shirt that they got given at the event. There is also positive news from Nintendo's financial reports at the top. Continuing the news, the next 2 pages are packed with info and updates. Firstly, there is another apology for the magazine being late, and the reason this time was that Will's dog had eaten the master copy, so they all had to work through the night to redo the entire magazine. The N64 DD also gets an official release date as March 1998, and the concerns were already mounting as the N64's capabilities when it came to RPGs in Japan. The console had been struggling there as the Japanese were awaiting some big RPG titles to convince them to buy the console, as this was the most popular game type of this time. There is also news about Nintendo and Rare being at E3, and the N64 magazine staff saying the name Banjo-Kazooie was cringeworthy now that the project formerly known as Dream has a title. To the right is the usual retro section, but this month some Game & Watch titles get reviews as well as Castlevania 3. Quarterback Club 98 gets a quick look with some positive opinions from the writers, however they question how well it will do in the UK with the American football fan base being so small. The seeds are planted here with the Top Gear Rally versus Multi-Racing Championship battle, and Top Gear Rally gets praised for the lack of pop-up which the developers masked using light fogging during the game. WCW vs NWO World Tour gets a first look, and it's clear the writers didn't have a clue about wrestling, as they mentioned in the game there is a trade shop where you can swap The Undertaker for Ric Flair. The very early shots of Earthworm Jim 3 here already look troubling, but just below SATA confirmed that Wild Choppers has not been cancelled as previously rumoured. Cruisin' World gets confirmed as a follow-up to Cruisin' USA, and the developers promise it will be a much better game than the last one. To the right is RPG news, and yet again this is dominated by Mother 3. There are also angry fans asking why Final Fantasy VII isn't coming to the N64, and the writers say it would take over 30 N64 DD carts to get the game on the console, so it's never going to happen. Goemon gets a release date too, and finally Pocket Monsters 64 gets a mention and sets Pokemon fans' hearts racing. Turning over, and Chameleon Twist is covered, and the writers speak favourably about the game, however they do admit that it is hardly likely to set the charts alight, and this is confirmed when the developers say the game is really aimed at kids. Go-Go Troublemakers gets a final mention before its Japanese release, and the writers also promise that the Western release will get a full review in the next issue. As usual, at the middle of the page is a blue strip holding the most exciting news. Capcom USA are adamant that Capcom is not working on any N64 games, however Capcom Japan confirmed that they are. This is probably the first mention of Resident Evil 64 here. Also, there is news that Sony have held secret meetings with Eidos and have now successfully talked them into a deal which prevents Tomb Raider from coming to the N64. Apparently, Sony were worried that the N64 port would steal their thunder. A look to the right hand page is the Ultra Release list, which always throws up some interesting beta projects including Turrican 64 listed here. Game Japan leads with the news that Turok is now being released in Japan, however first person shooters have traditionally flopped in the land of the rising sun, so Nintendo are watching its sales closely. There is also concern at the lack of advertising from Nintendo for Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, as Nintendo really should be jumping on the Star Wars re-release which has set the box office alight. Something which I had never seen before is mentioned to the right. A promo item for Multi-Racing Championship on Game Boy has a Game Boy covered in a paint which, when left in sunlight for 10 minutes, will allow it to glow in the dark for 10 hours. Continuing the Japanese look is a guide to shopping in Japan with some lingo. I've been to Japan myself, so this wasn't too interesting for me now, however as a kid I'm sure I will have found it very interesting. We've reached Arena now, which is where we will begin this issue's reviews, so I'll be back after this short break to get in depth with Mario Kart 64, Mortal Kombat Trilogy and War Gods. The import version of Mario Kart 64 was reviewed in a previous issue, so I won't be going into too much detail as I've covered it previously. What is interesting here though is just how crappy the PAL version is. The writers still give the game a fantastic score, but are alarmed at just how bad the port is from the Japanese release. If you've watched previous episodes of this show, you'll remember I talked about how the PAL Wave Race was much slower than the Japanese release, and it's the same true with Mario Kart 64. For the purposes of this review, I played the PAL version and I was as great at the game as I remember being back in the day. Then I played the North American version on my EverDrive 64 and also the Japanese version, and I was terrible. The game is about 20% faster, and when you're used to the PAL version you'll notice a big change going between the different regions. This is also true with some of the lap times, as you'll be much slower playing the PAL kart. There are also the horrible borders here in the PAL regions that we've become used to that you don't find in other territories. The magazine rightly points out that Konami put the effort into fixing the games for the PAL releases, and Nintendo really should follow suit. Mortal Kombat Trilogy gets an utter pasting here, and rightly so. This is one of the laziest caching games to ever hit the N64. The game is essentially Ultimate Mortal Kombat from the Super Nintendo with very slightly upgraded backgrounds. The character models are identical, and so to charge such a high price for this game was an insult. N64 magazine, I salute you for not giving this game a good review for the sake of a backhander from Midway. Tim Weaver drops a great line about the storyline of this game when he said, it has more corn than Kansas. Worryingly, up next is War Gods, another N64 fighter which is utter garbage. The hilarious thing about this review is that you can read a timeline of updates from the moment that they took the game out of the box to realising they've wasted their own money buying it. Another fighting game from Midway. This is surprising that they would release two so close together, especially when War Gods is essentially a Mortal Kombat clone. The writers state they hope it's because Midway have something up their sleeves for Mortal Kombat 4, and until then this is another poor fighting game on the N64, which is really struggling for quality games right now. Game guides for ISS 64 and the second part of the Mario 64 Master Guide are now playing. As always, I won't talk about these, however if you want to read them, pause the video or go to the out of print archive to download the issues so you can have them on your computer or tablet. In this issue, the magazine features an article about how to survive a Japanese arcade. Having been to Japan, I really like this article, and you can tell their passion and wonder truly comes through in their writing. They give breakdowns about the most popular machines and how you play them, as well as coin conversion rates, and also the environment where you will find the machines. If you've been to Japan, you'll know the difference between a pachinko hall and a regular arcade, and know they also attract very different types of player. And here we've got a double-page spread of adverts. Huzzah! The Nintendo hotline provides some very cool tips and cheats in this issue, mostly for the launch titles, including some niggly stars in Mario 64 and tips for Turok, Wave Race and Mario Kart. There is also a whole host of codes for Mortal Kombat Trilogy, however this is not a game you should really be in a hurry to play. Tips Extra has some tips for ISS and Star Fox, however the funniest section is the reader tips, where fans have written in to school the magazine on secrets they have not mentioned yet. Included in this is a tip from Mario Kart 64's Yoshi Circuit and how to find level 30 in Doom 64. Time now for my favourite section of each issue, Club 64. This is where readers send letters into the magazine and they get replied to. In this issue there is a story of a boy who borrowed an N64 from his sister's boyfriend, and his pet parrot has eaten through the controller cable, so he's going to have to sell his SNES games to help pay for a new controller before her boyfriend comes back. There are also fans backlashing against the N64, and the writers invite the other readers to send in replies. Readers have also been angered by the poor score for NBA, saying that the review was low because none of the writers like basketball. Dream On this month features fans' ideas for games such as Cannonball Run and a Doom-inspired X-Files type game. And here we have another double spread of adverts for you to gaze over. And as always, here is the directory which features all game reviews and scores for both import and PAL release games. The final featured article for this issue is a look inside America's game industry. What is interesting here is looking at just how many of these studios have either gone bust or they've sold out. Most fans know the history of Nintendo in the US, but if you don't, then this is a cool little article which should bring you up to speed. It also tells you what projects the studios are currently working on and what their plans are for the Nintendo 64. And so this brings us to the end of this issue. Episode 5 will be up on the 1st of March, and until then, thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed the show, please hit that like button, share the video with your friends, and drop me a comment below. As always, I reply to everybody. Until then, see you soon.